The midos of our child is such an integral part of who they are. Midos in general is something that is not even included in the Torah because it is such a prerequisite, such an important building block before anything else in the building of our child and the building of ourselves. In the next few episodes, we're going to be learning from great giants in the field of inspiring others, parenting experts, with the most effective way to raise children with good midos. In this first episode, we speak with Sara Blau, who is an incredible educator, an author of many children's books, many adult books. Sara has an incredible grasp on life, as you will see throughout this episode, with incredible insights as to how we can raise our children with great midos. Without further ado, enjoy the episode. Raising children in general is not easy. Throw in the desire to have passionate and committed Jews, now that's next level hard. My name is Rabbi Irman Shell. As an educator, parent educator, and a parent of young children, I'm on the journey just like you to learn how we can best parent our children to take care of the whole child and each child and to help guide them in their journey of their relationship with Hashem. With weekly episodes answering your biggest parenting questions, you will gain the best practices you need to raise your children the way you want. To raise the Jews next door. This week's episode, we have the pleasure of talking with Mrs. Sara Blau, who was a teacher, is the extracurricular director at Beth Rivkah High School, as well as an author of 24 children's books. Wow, it's incredible. And 2 women's books and hundreds of articles on Chabad.org. And it's really a pleasure to talk to one of the leaders of our generation, of our door, to talk about raising the Jews next door. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk. And
sure, it's an honor to be here.
Amazing. So we're going to be talking in this week. This is all about morals and values, how to raise children with morals and values. So first things first, how do you define morals and values?
So I think as Torah Jews, morals and values is defined by what Torah defines as a moral and a value. Torah is from the word hayra, a lesson.
Right.
So, the lessons, we're not just sharing stories, of things that happened thousands of years ago.
Right.
When we're looking at even modern day current events, we're shaping our views of what is a moral and what is a value from the Torah. So that's where we keep going back to.
Wow.
And when we're parenting and when we're teaching and when we're educating, we keep going back to the source. We keep going back to the Torah.
So in your own home, like you'll reference back to either stories in the Torah or to bring out values and midos and different things.
It's everything.
Right.
It's everything. It's not just a side thing. This is who we are. It's not just a cultural thing. This is what shapes our life.
Right.
Torah is what guides us and shows us what is kind, what is moral, because, we're all very subjective.
Right.
If I got to decide, I could decide that cleanliness is important or isn't important, or kindness, or what's considered kind and what's considered not kind.
Right. It's otherwise totally subjective. So now the Torah's objective truth, whatever the truths are of the Torah that we have.
Right. And, when you think about it, there have been cultures, there have been nations that have been cultured, and then they were totally misled.
Right.
And the most recent horrific example is, the Germans.
Right.
They were cultured people. They valued, learning and culture, and yet there was a Holocaust.
Right.
So I do believe that that Torah establishes our values and everything is shaped by that.
Wow. So what would you say obviously it's anything that's in the Torah then, but what specific morals and values should parents make sure to bring in to focus on when they're trying to instill those moral values, that their children are midos children? Like what exactly should be the focus?
Obviously,
like you're saying, anything of the Torah, but in what ways and what specific things should parents choose to focus on?
Right. So obviously there's the mitzvah of v'ahavta l'reacha kamaycha, and being sensitive to ager, and there's the mitzvahs in the Torah, and there's Pirkei Avos.
Right.
There's the ethics of our fathers. It's literally what are our values,
right,
and what do we believe, and what we believe are good midos. And, you mentioned the children's book, and, the concept from the children's books, I could be a Zares, are all values based on what, today people like to use the word like old school in a very negative connotation. Like, oh, that is so old school.
Right.
When for us, it's really the reverse.
Right.
Old school we treasure, we value our morals that have withstood this test of time. This is not just like we woke up with it today.
Right.
This is thousands of years old.
Right. It's true.
And at the same time, I think, you're saying what should parents focus on? I think it's also important to remember that there are age appropriate things. So the Torah is vast and there's a lot of things to teach. But the same way, a newborn baby doesn't eat a steak, and an adult would not be able to just eat a diet of just milk.
Right.
So there's one book that I treasure. It's called Klalei Chinuch v'Hadracha, Principles of Education and Guidance. And this was written by the 6th Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson. Actually, I have a son named after him, Yosef Yitzchak.
Amazing.
And he writes here, when you read it, you're like, it does even seem almost like 2022.
Right,
it's so, up to date, so intuitive. And he writes, there are certain things that we start off teaching younger children. And as they get older, you can add more things.
Right.
So he gives an example. A younger child, Seder v'Nikayon is very important. Now you would think that the Frierdiker Rebbe, the 6th Chabad Rebbe, when he's talking about chinuch, would talk about, Avos Hashem, saying Shema at night. But the first thing is like a basic menschlichkeit.
Right.
And he says as the child gets older to, becomes closer to bar mitzvah, I have a son, someone's bar mitzvah, so I'm thinking about it.
Right.
He could focus more on hidur mitzvah, and he could focus more on times or davening. So you're asking about morals and values. It's important to know what our values are. Right. And it's important to also feed our children a diet that's age appropriate. Right.
So that's what I was going to say, is that there's so much in the Torah. So how do parents choose, which specific things at what times to introduce, saying, okay, this is at this time is what I should be introducing to this child that's, let's say, age 3, and then this child that's age 5 or 6, and then 7 or 8, or, and I know we're not going to talk necessarily so much about teens, but then you get into teens and things change a little bit, or maybe a lot of it. So how do parents choose, okay, these are the morals and values that I want to make sure to give over to my children now? Like, Pirkei Avos is so vast. So how do we be, that? How do we constrict that to, what it needs to be for right now?
Right. So first of all, I remember like my Pre-1A report card. When I was in Pre-1A, I'll never forget it. I brought home a report card and my father laughed and laughed and laughed that I had a report card in Pre-1A. And I remember what it looked like, because there were these diagonals with pictures. It was all pictures. And one picture was food and serving. And one picture was all age appropriate to Pre-1A.
Wow. There
was maybe one on Aleph Beis. All of it was midas. How do I get along with my peers? How respectful am I? So, I was brought up this way, and we continue to understand and recognize, even from an educational point of view, that you can't expect, you want to teach time management to a toddler.
Right.
So how would you choose it? I know that for me, when I started writing the I Can Be series, I could be a gibar, I could be mevatar, I could be a zariz. So a lot of it for me came from what my children were struggling with at the moment.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
That's where the most meaningful content comes from, 100%.
You know what I'm saying? I'm with my kids, I'm with my husband, I'm with my family, and we strategize, like, what are we going to be teaching? And I really wanted those books to be a helpful tool in the classroom. And that's why at the end, I included these like mitzvah notes, my child was a gibar. And I've had so many mothers who told me that these books were teaching tools to even explain what does the concept of mevater mean. What does it mean to make a kiddush Hashem? So, in terms of what is needed, I really think it's not, it's not one size fits all.
Right. What
does a child need? What is the temperament of the child? What does the family need? What's needed in the moment? And that's why we have resources. We learn, if our values are going to be based by Torah, we need to be learning Torah.
Sure.
If our values are going to be based by, what we're learning, we need to have, who do I learn from?
Sure.
And it doesn't mean we need to learn from the same people. The beauty of the Jewish life is that there are many different people teaching from many different perspectives. And it's all one Torah.
Right.
So
amazing. You mentioned that, when it's depending on what's happening at that time, what's needed at that time, how much of morals and values should be given thought to. I mean, obviously in the idealist form, it should be given thought to before, to be spoken about like with the child before, as opposed to being reactive. But how can parents be effective in giving over morals and values when it's done in a reactionary way, as opposed to if it's done in a preemptive way?
Okay, so I want to just clarify something. Even though I did say that it should be based on what's needed, it doesn't mean in the moment. He spilled something and start giving them a drasha.
Right. Okay.
So even though it might be based on what's needed, I still believe that the most successful ways of giving over morals and values is preventative. In other words, you don't pull out the book when the kid is struggling and be like, here it says bibivater.
Right. Like, look, it says in Perkei Avos, you can't do that.
Everything is calm and you're
Right.
putting them to bed or you're sitting on the couch and you have a discussion.
Sure.
Then later it can ring true for them.
Mhm.
So we talk about making a Kiddush Hashem and cleaning up after yourself at the park.
Right.
Or you talk about whatever is necessary, not in the heat of the moment.
Mhm.
And, you know, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab, said that parents should spend half an hour a day thinking about the chinuch of their children. Now, I don't know how many of us actually do that.
Half we should be doing a half hour, but is half hour really enough? But okay.
Is half hour really enough? I mean, your podcast is, going to help people hopefully with what to think about. But the point is, it takes thought.
Right.
A teacher would never walk into the classroom and just teach.
Right.
They prepare. And yet when we think of our own chinuch and our own education and giving over morals and values, do we prepare? Do we think how we want to give over a certain moral and a value?
Yeah, it's a very good point. A very, very good point. Right. So first of having that thought. So I guess, so that's a good segue into parents, right? Meaning, is it the role of parents versus schools? Or is there some way, I guess, for there to be like a partnership between parents and schools or parents and shuls to give over these moral values? Meaning, what are the roles? Is it primarily it should be parents? Should it be primarily being done in school, and then the parents are kind of just helping? Like what would you say is the? So
I'm speaking as a parent
and an educator,
but as an educator, I really think there's like a circle, and it's I don't think it's an option to not work hand in hand.
Right.
In other words, from one perspective, the teacher's kind of teaching it theoretically in the classroom and the parent is living it, kind of like go to med school, you learn things, and then there's nothing like going and actually being an intern, seeing what's happening. So I think that in that sense, parents are the role model.
Right.
The kids are seeing things in real time. It's not a lesson in the classroom per se always. Like the teacher is probably more theoretical and the parents more real time.
Right.
How do they actually react? At the same time, in order for a child to really absorb the message, it's most effective when the parents and teachers are on the same page.
Right, for sure.
And I think it is a partnership, right? I want to be in touch with my children's rebbeim, and they want the support at home also, that we're both molding them and inculcating the same values.
Right. Do you think that there's enough of a partnership that's like already naturally happening right now, or like it would be something that like maybe can be improved on?
I think that schools are improving on it more and more.
Right.
I know in the school that I work at in Beth Rivkah, we started this initiative called Branches, where we're trying to support the mothers and in their educating their children. We are partners together. What can we do to support you?
Sure.
And I think a lot of schools are working on the relationship constantly. And when you come to that PTA or you come to that open school night, that I think that the best thing for the child is for the school and the home to be on the same page.
Sure, for sure. Okay, so let's get into, from a parenting perspective, what are the most fundamental things that a parent should be keeping in mind? Obviously, the Torah is the most fundamental. And then after that, meaning building on that, what else should the parents make sure to have in mind, specifically when trying to, accomplish the basics of raising their child with morals and values, midos?
So a few things came to mind. The first thing that comes to mind is, when we think about good behavior, good midos, or good values, the opposite of that might seem to be a bad midah or a bad behavior. And I think it's important to recognize that actually quite often it's just two sides of the same coin. And the Frierdiker Rebbe, who's the sixth Chabad Rebbe that I mentioned before, actually discusses this in one of the chapters. And he gives some examples. For example, self-confidence. Is that a positive trait? Self-confidence, is that a positive trait or is that a negative trait?
Interesting.
It could be very positive.
Right.
A self-confident child can learn and will ask questions and won't be shy and will try new things. But the flip side of that is he might be arrogant.
Right.
So what are we doing? What's chinuch? We're trying to help him channel his trait into the positive. That bossy kid, not bad kid.
Right.
Just needs to learn and you can share stories, what type of leader was Moshe Rabbeinu?
Right.
How did he care for his flock? How did he care for the sheep and the literal sheep and the figurative, right? The Yidden. So, and the flip side, humility seems like is that a positive?
Right.
It could be very positive. But a kid with like very low self-esteem also can't learn.
Right.
And a kid who so thinks lowly of himself is not comfortable in new situations. It could get in the way of his learning. So him too, him or her, channeling, wow, his humility could be very positive. So when we look at it that way, we're not looking at our children as bad kids that we need to make good.
Right.
We're looking at our children as a full picture.
Wow.
God blessed them with a personality.
Yeah, I love that.
And it's our responsibility to help them channel it. And if we think about it, we're also doing that for ourselves.
Right.
We each were blessed with strengths and weaknesses, and it's usually the same thing.
Totally.
It's usually the same thing.
I love that.
So I think that was one thing that I thought is important to keep in mind. Another thing that came to my mind when you asked that question about keeping in mind is also, it's very easy to say what we don't want. And it's so powerful to bring out more of what we do want.
What do you mean by that?
There's a famous story of the Baal Shem Tov that was once in Shul. And he overheard two men arguing. And one man got so angry at the other guy, he says, "I'm going to tear you apart like a fish." And the Baal Shem Tov stopped everybody in the room. He asked everybody to get into a circle and hold hands and close their eyes. And they suddenly had a vision where they saw in heaven, spiritually, the man was actually tearing the other guy like a fish.
Oh, wow.
Now, if that's the case in negative, that our words have power,
Right.
how much more so in the positive? So when the kid is messy
Mhm.
or rude, right? Instead of just being like, "Don't say that," which is, we all do that. Stop, you're embarrassing,
Right.
Bring out the positive. That one time he is organized. Wow, look how clean you
Right
were.
away to point it out right away.
Yeah.
Right.
You were so clean. That was so impressive. You spoke so nicely to your brother. Thank you for saying that the way you did. And the more we bring that out in our children, right? So kind of going back to your question, what do you need to work on when you're working on your children? I mean, one of the easiest ways to help them with their values is to actually see them already having the value that you want.
Right. And then you went, like, for example, like I'll sometimes say to my child, like, I love the way that you said that. I love that you said it with a please, or I love that you said that thank you. Like just putting that out there in that explicit way. It's saying to them, this is exactly what I'm trying to get you to realize is the right thing to do.
Right.
When you frame it
and
that
not
way.
just that, this is the real you.
Right.
This is the godly soul. This is the neshama that Hashem gave you. This is the real you.
And you would say that explicitly?
I say that all the time.
Really? Oh, I love that.
I was reading Rabbi Shalom Mordechai Rubashkin's book, and he gave an example there that his son wanted an ice cream that wasn't the best hechsher. So he was trying to bribe his son not to have it. I'll buy you 10 ice creams another time. And his kid did, he wanted the ice cream. And he finally said to him, like, your neshama doesn't want this. And the kid accepted that.
Wow.
And I had a situation with my 4-year-old. He didn't want to make a bracha on his tzitzis.
Right.
I said to him, Tzemach, I know that really your neshama wants to make a bracha on tzitzis.
And that was it.
He did it.
Wow.
So I think that it's part of our job to help them realize, who are they really? I mean, what's our real identity?
Right.
We have an animal soul, a nefesh habahamis. God gave it to us, which we can channel, like we said before, into the positive. But the real us, who our real identity is our neshama. Because kids start thinking of themselves as a bad kid.
Right.
Not good.
Once you do that, it's
So if we believe it in ourselves, we will be able to believe it, for our children. And that's the biggest gift we can give them. Like, no, you really are good.
Right.
You're the good kid. Sometimes maybe you make a mistake, but we all do.
Right. How does one get their child to believe that though? Meaning, because once a child starts believing I am this bad kid, I feel like it in a certain way, it's hard to break them out of that mindset in a way. So how does meaning to break them out of that mindset in order to get them to realize I can be good. I can have good morals. I can have good midos. So how does one break them out of that already?
So I think it's very important, whatever age, my children are little, but I work in a high school with teenagers. I think that it's important to educate them what the Jewish psyche is, what the Jewish soul is from a very young age.
Really? At what age would you?
from when they're little, they could understand. I mean, we know the terms Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Tov.
Right.
So similarly, the concept of who they really are is their essence, is their neshama from a very young age, because kids are pure. They accept, when you talk to them about Hashem, they take it face value.
So true.
They don't question you.
It's amazing.
Whatever you said, Hashem,
Literally the other day I was doing some sort of chesed, and my son was with me, and he's like, and then after finishing doing that mitzvah, I had the opportunity to hold the door open for an elderly person. And when I got back into the car, my son was like, "Abba, you just created 2 malachim for Hashem and for you." Like, that was just like his automatic, and he's 5 years old. And like, it was amazing. It was like so incredible. That was his like just immediate response. Like, that was how he looked at it. It was just like you said, they take it at face value. It's just like, oh, you can just talk about Hashem straight up.
You could talk about Hashem, you could talk about Neshama. And, part of chinuch is understanding that it's a process.
Right.
The same way, a baby is born, like we said before, a baby's born eating one diet and then grows. Things will take time.
Sure.
People are not going to change overnight. We don't change overnight.
It's true.
We're in Elul now. We're in a time of introspection and we're working on ourselves. If I could make a list of 50 things I need to work on. I can't do everything.
Sure.
I could take small steps, and somehow we expect our children to be like perfect at everything right away.
Right.
And it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Chinuch is a process.
Yeah, that's very important. Right. Taking the long view with it. It's very true. Okay. So I'm curious, we said before, you said like starting at a very young age. So, knowing these things and bringing our children up with these values is like really builds their core from the youngest ages, is really like vital to their development. So at what age should we be starting? And then what does it look like at that age? And then I guess maybe we'll build up on each of the ages, and, we can talk at whatever ages you're, feel comfortable.
You really want to know? Before conception.
Okay. What do you mean?
In other words, creating an environment of chinuch doesn't start when the child is born. The same way a business has a mission statement.
Right.
And a school has core values, that's they're very into today. What are the schools? A couple sits down. What are their core values? And what's their home going to look like? Some people think they could do whatever they want. And the kids come, okay, that, kids see everything. So even before a child is even conceived, you're creating an environment. And then throughout pregnancy and right away from birth, we surround our child with holy images, Aleph Beis, Torah. I mean, look, there's the picture of the Rebbe here.
We have amazing pictures painted by Mrs. Blau herself. Amazing.
Right, but why do we fill our homes with pictures?
You could see, maybe.
Why do we fill our pictures with pictures of Gedolim? And it's the music that we play.
Right.
All this affects a child from before they are born.
Right.
What is the home that they're going to be born into? What is the atmosphere? And these things are not so subtle as we think. They really impact.
Well, that's in terms of setting up a more like the Yiddish environment, like but specifically in terms of the morals and the values, obviously that's very interconnected. But, at what point do we start to give those things over? Meaning like what you were saying before, like saying explicitly or trying to get them to realize like you're neshama. Like at what point can a child really start to understand that in a real way? And then what's the appropriate ways to give that over?
So, think about Yiddish mothers for throughout the generations. They sing songs, they sing Shema and Torah Tziva. From the baby's an infant.
It's true.
So chinuch, it's not like parenting is separate from teaching Torah and separate from teaching values. It's one. It's our life. This is what, from the cradle, what Yiddish mothers sang. So while it's true that certain things start at certain ages, right? It's also under bar and bar mitzvah. The whole thing is about chinuch. The whole thing is practice and preparation. And in many circles, at the age of 3, they start yarmulke and tzitzis, and certain things are already built into the system when you have a siddur party, when you have a chumash party. But you see, it's like in a level, it's all getting ready for a Jewish adulthood, for taking and owning.
So setting up that environment,
your own Yiddishkeit. So at every age, at every stage, there's, like you said, there's the general Yiddish environment, and our values are not separate from that.
Sure. Of course.
Our neshama wants to do what Hashem wants. Our neshama wants to have Avos Yisrael, have Derech Eretz. When does Kibbut of Aim start? I mean, when does it
When
start?
does it not?
You know, like
Right.
we are constantly
At what
educating.
point would a child be able to start to really practically not just understand it, but then to actually put it into play where they start to make the connection between what you've always been setting up in that environment, that they can then say, oh, like that's what kibbut av v'em is, or like this is, you know, that's good midos, that's being nice, that's being good sharing, or, you know, at what point does it really come out that a parent can give that over in a way that a child can really start to like connect the two in a way?
Right. So I think it depends each child and each concept. That's why even amongst my books, some of my books are like board books, very simple. My sheet turns 3, you know, a little bit of this, of Aleph Beis, a little bit of Tzedakah, Siddur. And as opposed to the Midos books, they're not for 3 and 4-year-olds.
Right.
They're written more, they're more developed. They have a lot more words on the page. You know, 6 through 8-year-olds are much more able to understand than a 3 and 4-year-old.
Sure.
So I think it's important to understand child development. I think it's important. You know, it's not like I could just rattle off a curriculum. This is what you should do at this age. This is what you should do at this age.
Right.
I think it's very important to strategize.
Right.
And that's where, you know, husband, wife, family, school, we're a team. What does this child need to learn?
Right.
You know, what are our core values that we're going to speak about? And you also can't do too much at once.
Right.
You can't.
Well, that I remember you spoke about that in one of your articles that you spoke about. I think it was titled "First Things First: How Not to Tackle Change," which is a very interesting, very intriguing, you know, title. And you spoke about how, just to take a quote, if you try to put a stop to too much, there will be an overwhelming amount of inner resistance. By allowing your client or student to indulge in desires for the time being, even if they are not the most positive ones, your client can focus her energies on her most glaring character defect. So that, like, exactly like you're saying. So I guess the question is then, if that's the case, that, you know, don't take on too much. So what should parents focus on first? Meaning, like, as that child reaches that age, or for each child, whatever it is, what are the midos, you know, to really make sure to, or what are the messages? You know, like maybe it's just like you're saying, the neshama, and that neshama wants to do what Hashem wants. What messages and what should parents specifically try to focus on first?
So the quote that you read is actually almost word for word from the Principles of Education and Guidance. And this is really why it's such a guidebook for me and shapes the way I parent and educate. And, you know, I don't know that I would have the confidence to say it if you know, this is what I learned from my Rebbe. No, you know what I'm saying? Like, and he says there that, let's say there's a child that is struggling with saying the truth and anger. It doesn't mean that saying the truth isn't important and you shouldn't share stories.
Right.
But anger, which in this case, you know, he calls it like the worst of the 2 midas, would be more important to tackle. See how you can help him overcome, how you can help him calm down, how you could help him, you know, appropriately express his frustration. Sure. How you could help him or her. I'm used to saying him because I have boys, but yes, you know, 50% of the population is probably little girls. So it is possible that you need to, you know, tackle the one that's hurting you the most, so to speak. And again, it doesn't mean tackling by catching them when they're doing wrong. Sure. And it also doesn't mean, you know, the natural go-to thing is hang up your VCs, clean up, you know, put away your plates, like issuing commands. It really takes a lot of thought. And I think that the most important thing I would want to leave people with is not so much telling you what to do as much as inviting you to put thought into this. You know, I mentioned a teacher in a classroom before, but even in camp, I direct a camp in the summer, we have themes. And a Novice Yisrael week, like, okay, we're all talking about Novice Yisrael. So they're going to have twin day, and there's going to be heart races. And in Share class, they're going to have stories and do activities about Novice Yisrael. And imagine as parents, we kind of had themes with our kids. What's the theme for each child? And I learned this a little bit also from Rabbi Manis Friedman, who I wrote some children's books with for, but he was one who based on the Principles of Education, you know, based on this, who said, you know, we part of that half-hour a day would go into, I would say it like this. There's a difference between every Shabbos sharing a Dvar Torah and generally sharing a lesson from the Parsha, which is always important, and the zeroing in on the midah that I feel my child needs most support in. Because we're always teaching lessons. I mean, it's part of our life. But when it comes to a child specifically, it means that sometimes we might need to turn a blind eye. it sometimes might mean that might not be the most important thing to call attention to.
Because of what you're saying, that like, don't try to stop everything at once. Meaning,
Yeah.
choose what you're gonna.
Yeah.
Right.
So if it's right now important, whether it's a young child, say Divrei or, whatever this child needs to work on, whether it's forgetting or, being happy for other children, jealousy. The Torah has so many things, and you could flip it, being happy for other people.
Right.
There are so many characteristics that we get to work on.
Sure.
That the same way we can't overwhelm ourselves, we also can't overwhelm our children with our expectations of them.
Totally. You just mentioned that, sometimes you're giving over like a nice idea, but also to focus on specific things that happen, that are specific to your child. So every day there are things that come up in our homes or in our child's lives that are happening for them at school, or, just in different things that give an opportunity to speak about morals, values, speak about midos. Like it comes up like almost at every opportunity. So what's the right way for a parent to approach that conversation, to use whatever happened as a conversation starter to then get into, here's really the right way to approach that. How does that conversation look like? Meaning like as practical as possible. Like, what would that look like
I'll tell you what, this is why I write children's books. I have found that the most effective way to share anything is through a story. When it's about someone else, right? When it's about another little boy named Dovi and he didn't know what to do, and this is what he did, it is so much easier for the child to absorb. And I have to give credit to my father. He raised me with so many stories.
Really?
One of my favorite stories that he shared with me growing up and the impression that it made on me,
right,
was my father grew up in communist Russia. So he did not go to school, and it was a secret and it was hidden. So he stayed home with my aunt, and he did have a uniform, hanging on the wall with a briefcase in case people would come to the house. No one was allowed to know. It was a big secret that he didn't go to school. And one day my grandmother had to leave, and she warned them, obviously, don't open the door for anybody.
Right.
They lived in danger and in fear.
It's crazy. Wow.
So she left, and my father is home with my aunt, and they saw somebody come into the house. So my father came up with this idea. He's like, let's pretend we went to school. Let's put on our, he said he was going to do it. He's like, I'm going to put on my uniform, and at 4:00, I'm going to come to the front of the house as if I was in school. Brilliant plan.
Right.
So he put on the uniform, went to the side of the house, hid in the bushes. And when he thought or imagined it was the time that school was over, he came to the front of his house. He had instructed his little sister to open the door for whoever's by the door. And he comes in, he sees this other person, and the other person starts laughing and laughing and laughing. And he says, say my father's name. Today is Sunday. There's no school.
That's amazing.
And thank God it was one of ours. It was another Chabad Chassid. It wasn't a dangerous person. But my father shared that with me so many times, and it left such an impression, the Mesiras Nefesh that my grandparents had for this.
Wow. I
mean, the lengths that they went to keep Yiddishkeit, that's my father. But even, on my mother's side, my great-grandfather passed away in exile.
Wow.
And he was sent there, and he was imprisoned because he was teaching Torah. So when you're raising children on stories, you're not lecturing.
Right.
The other day I heard a story from Rabbi Simon Jacobson. So I came home and I shared it with my son about a Rosh Hashiva or a principal by the name of Rabbi Ushbal. Hope I got it right. And it's not a long story. All I shared with my son is that this Rabbi Ushbal used to talk to the Bachrim, and he didn't only talk to the Bachrim about Torah and Yiras Hashem and everything. He would talk to the boys about hygiene, about taking showers and brushing your teeth. And I'm repeating this to my son, and he's laughing. I said, Naftali, you're never going to believe what this Rosh Hashiva spoke to the Bachrim about. He's like, what? I'm like, taking a shower, brushing your teeth. And he laughed. I didn't have to give him the reminder.
Right. He got
I was sharing a story to impart, this is important.
This is important, right?
Now, what's the punchline of that story was Rabbi Simon Jacobson shared that he asked him, why are you talking to the boys about this?
Right.
And he said, what do you mean? Mamleches Kaihanim Gai Kadesh. We're a holy nation. Of course, you have to take care of ourselves.
Right.
And that was what I shared with my son.
That's
I'm
awesome.
not giving him the speech and repeating a story.
Gotcha.
And my son is also a Kayin. So I'm like, you're a Kayin, right? You have a guf that was given to you from Hashem to take care of. In other words, everything is framed by Torah. It's not, and that goes back to, it's not just morals. It's not just what we think makes sense. Torah teaches us about derech eretz, about menschlichkeit, about doing what Hashem wants, but bein adam l'makom and bein adam l'chavera, like in every aspect.
Love it. That's amazing. And the stories that is it stories that are necessarily like sometimes like personal stories or more like sometimes stories that are made up? Like what types of stories? Because I'm curious more in terms of like, let's say a parent says like is listening to this and saying, well, that's awesome, but like I don't have like a bank of stories to just pull out and be like, here. So how does a parent how does a parent do that? Like meaning how do they just like or is there something that they should do to kind of like build up a bank of stories? Like what do you recommend in terms of that?
I think both. I think today, walk into any Judaica store, there are so many books of stories. And again, of Gedolim, of inspirational stories. There's so much out there.
Got to check out your book.
No, it happens to be my book for women are not stories, but my books are probably the second variety, not stories, not necessarily real stories that could teach ideas of Emunah and B'tachon. My stories are really made up. Right. Like I brought here to show you as an example. This book is called Oops, I'm Sorry, right? We're coming up to Yom Kippur. So, it's a very, it helps me so much.
Right.
So I wrote this book for my kids and then share it with everybody. And it just specifies the concept of tshuva, right? Saying sorry is first, help to fix it, and then find a way to make sure it won't happen again. So my kids already know something happens, a kid, and in family life, it happens. You knock down the magnetile tower. It's just what happens. Saying sorry is first, help to fix it, and then find a way to make sure it won't happen again. It takes the attention out of it.
Sure.
So I think, making up stories, so to speak, and finding stories online, recordings. We're so lucky today. There's so many resources and that are giving over these values, whether it's honesty, whether it's whatever you think is important, you can find it.
I love that. Okay. So stories it is. What would you say? I'm curious, what is in terms of, you've written so many books and, children's books really give a window into a child's world because you're writing it for a child who to be able to be either read to or to read it themselves to really get into their mind. So you're writing it in a way that's really going to speak to them. So how do you choose? Obviously specific themes that you choose to focus on, but how do you choose which morals you want to make sure to focus on? And then how do you, it's a hard question to answer, I guess, in certain ways, but like, how do you weave that together in a book that gives over that moral?
Right. So actually a children's book of mine that just came out, it's called A to Z Meant to Be. And Rabbi Manis Friedman, he said one line to me, in our discussions, he said to me, you should be so busy being grateful that you don't have time to complain. Like, wow. So, I kind of created a story around that. It's a very real story. It's a girl who was supposed to travel somewhere and it was snowing. So her flight was canceled and there's real disappointment. And it's learning that when we focus on the gratitude, our feelings will change. We will be creating new and positive feelings.
Wow. It's like the Chovos HaLevavos says that our whole entire Avodas Hashem should be based off of just Hodah on Hakaras Tov to Hashem for everything He does for us. And therefore, just based on that alone, like we should be serving Hashem. And then, then there's so much more that you add into it. But just that's like the most fundamental, most basic thing that we have to have.
Right. I can't say every single one of my books has for sure a moral. Sometimes it's shapes and colors. Sure. But again, that goes back to the age appropriate thing.
Right.
Depending on the age. And even in
so I'm saying within the books that bring out those morals.
So let's say I have one board book called My Two Friends. And it's seemingly just a book about opposites. I have one friend that's tall and one that's short and one that likes black and one that likes white. But then I ended it saying like Hashem made all different types. Do you know what I mean? So it's like a simple line of including different people. Very different than a whole developed story.
Right.
But whatever it is, Torah Milashon Hara, like there's a lesson. There's something. It's such an opportunity.
Right.
We have it in the media also. Our videos that we're making our children, we're not just showing them videos. We want them to walk away with something. We want them to we want to shape them. And the truth is, that's what the whole world does. When a culture wants to change something, they do it by getting to the kids.
Yeah.
They do it. They go right to the children's books.
Yeah. And
I mentioned before about communism, like they forbade Jewish children's book. Like you couldn't bring it in. Why did it matter? Why is it so important? Because the children's mind, that's where it's at. We're shaping them.
Right.
So if you want to reach them, the children's books, and it's not just the words, by the way, the pictures are just as important. What are the subliminal messages?
Interesting.
And if you look at, a lot of books, especially Hachai, I know they're very into it, but all the publishers, I work with Judaica Press and Israel Bookshops, and there's put as many mitzvahs as you can. Put the olive base sign, put the tzedakah box, put the mezuzah. Put it all
there just to see.
It's the subliminal. It's the same way there's a Coca-Cola ad for 30 seconds.
Totally.
You're getting a child used to. These are our values. This is our life. Our life. Our bedrooms don't look the same. Our homes don't look the same. Everything is unique about us because we're Yidden. We're Jews. This is. The podcast is called The Next Door, right? This is the generation. This is our Messiah. This is what we're giving over from one generation to the next.
So true. So true. What would you say is something that people, I guess, don't think to ask within this topic about bringing up children with morals, values, with midos, but is really important for parents to know? Meaning something that maybe, let's say, as a teacher, as an author, or as a speaker and an article writer that you haven't necessarily got on the question, but it's something that no, parents really need to know this about raising their children with morals and values.
So I would just build on what I just said previously, that in addition to reading children's books being bonding time and a special time to connect, I would want parents to know not to underestimate how much this is really shaping your child and how much they're shaping their self-concept and that neshama that we spoke about. And also the mission. Hashem needs us here. Hashem created the world with a purpose. This other book is called Who Needs You?
Right.
Who needs you? Hashem, we have a mission here. We're not just here randomly. You make a child feel like they are so important.
Right.
They can do big things when they,
right?
If they can do that mitzvah, that Hashem needs them in the moment to do that mitzvah.
Right.
So I think it's, that's what I would want to just underscore. Like, this is not a side point, before you go to bed. It's
everything.
Stories are everything. Torah is everything. This is our education.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's like you were saying before that, how much time do parents really think about their chinuch, and they should have at least 30 minutes if that's even close to enough. But, to think about, like we were saying, I was just asking you before, how do they have stories? Maybe that should be their preparation. Okay, what story do I want to give over, this Shabbos at the Shabbos table, or, tonight at dinner, or whatever it is that I want to make sure to impart that value. That's I love that. Such a great idea. Any final message that you want to impart on our listeners, on, parents within this?
I think, when it comes to parenting, we all want the right formula. We want the guarantee our kids are going to turn out exactly the way we want them to. And I think with parenting, it's important to remember there's a third partner. We do our hishtadlus, and Hashem is the third partner.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, it could be scary. On the other hand, it could be so comforting. There's a story of somebody who came to the Lubavitcher Rebbe very pained. And because his children were no longer keeping the values that he had taught them.
Right.
And he said to the Rebbe, what I do wrong? And the Rebbe said, you didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
And, he said, I thought an apple doesn't fall far from the tree. The Rebbe said to him, it's true, but when winds blow, the apples could fall far.
Wow.
Now, when I first heard this story, I was like, oh, that's so scary. You could be spending all this effort and then you don't know what happens in the end.
Yeah.
But then I realized it's actually the exact opposite. It's not scary. It's a reminder you don't have control.
Right. It's total bitachon Hashem.
Wow. I need Hashem. When we feel like we got this, we know exactly the formula.
That's when you don't got it.
That's when you don't have it. It's like Rosh Hashanah coming up and we don't know what year and what's Hashem going to give us. And people get very anxious. And really it's the exact opposite. It's the most freeing thing to know. My job is not the end result. My job is to put the effort. My job is to improve myself. I'm far from perfect, just like our children are.
Right.
I'm far from perfect. How could I be better this week?
Wow.
How could I learn and go back to Torah, believe in my values, because we can't underestimate kids pick up doubt and hypocrisy. Well, they're very fine tuned to that. So strengthening ourselves so we can actually give over the value, and knowing that ultimately, relying on our third partner, relying on Hashem, and having the emunah b'tachon, like you said,
Amazing.
that our values should really transmit to the next generation. And I would say that they should recognize their mission, their purpose, and the ultimate purpose, with the coming of Mashiach. And that's our ultimate thing, that we're striving towards.
Man, amazing. Thank you so much. This was incredible, and really appreciate you taking the time, and really so much insight, and so much talent surrounding us. It's incredible. Thank you very, very much again.
Okay, you're welcome. It's a pleasure being here.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of the Jews Next Door. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. I'd love to hear your takeaways. Reach out to us. Reach out to me at yair@jenaleph.org, hi@jenaleph.org. You can check us out on the website. You could leave a question there. We'd love to be in touch. Please be in touch. Check us out on Instagram at Parenting the Jews Next Door. Hit me up on Twitter at Yair Menshel. And we're on TikTok now too. We have some great content, a lot of really great insights into parenting, tips, parenting pointers, reaction videos, and quotes. We have a lot going on. We have a lot of articles. You want to check it out. Check it out at jenaleph.org. You won't be sorry you did. And I look forward to hearing from you. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the podcast, make sure you subscribe and share it with your family and friends. Looking forward to another great episode next week.